My name is Ashley, and this is going to be my 2024 reading recap. Okay, I am just so excited to be doing this. I've wanted to do like a video like this for a really long time, and this is going to be my 2024 reading recap. I read how many books did I read this year? 80. I think I read 80 books this year. My goal was 100, but 80 is still pretty good. My goal is 100 again for 2025, and I really think I can do it. But this is just going to be talking about, what my 2024 year in books look like. I love to read. I've always loved to read. And I feel like in the past couple of years, like I found that joy, like that childhood joy that I had from reading. I found it again a couple years ago, and so I'm just so excited to keep finding more and more books. I keep finding more authors and more genres that I love, and so I'm just like so excited to be talking about like all the books that I read. So let's get started. The first book that I read in 2024 was The Great Believers. I read this because I think I saw another YouTuber, Uncarly, recommend this book as one of her favorites of 2023. So I decided to read it. The book is basically, it's like historical fiction. It takes place during the time when like the AIDS and the HIV epidemic was going on. So that's kind of the backdrop of the story. And it kind of just follows like these characters' lives as they're navigating, through losing friendships due to this illness, dealing with just the broader societal implications that like having something like HIV like comes with, how poorly the government at the time managed that whole situation. And so it's something that's like a period of time that I don't really know a lot about, and so I was like very curious to read it, and I gave it 4 stars. It was good. My only issue with the book was that it was dual point of view, and the first point of view was of the main character. I think his name was Nico, but then the second point of view was of like Nico's best friend's sister, and it took place in the future, and it was like a whole different storyline. And it's like, even though their lives are interconnected, it just didn't really click to me. And so because of that, I gave it 4 stars. That just took me out of the story a little bit. But overall, it was very good. It was very emotional. There was a quote, I think it's at the end of the book, that like really got me, that kind of set the waterworks a little bit. I think I'm trying to find it. Let me see. I think, okay. It says, if we could just be on Earth at the same place and same time as everyone we loved, if we could be born together and die together, it would be so simple, and it's not. But listen, you are on the planet at the same time, you're in the same place now. That's a miracle. And so I think the overall message of the book is like, yes, these horrible and devastating things can happen to you, but it's just about the joy that you choose to find in your circumstances. So that was Great Believers. And then the second book that I read was The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I was kind of curious to read this book because like I saw everything happening about like the Free Britney movement, and as someone who's, I wouldn't even call myself a casual listener of Britney Spears. I know who she is. I know the hits, and I heard about all the Free Britney stuff, but I wasn't even really that knowledgeable or involved in what was going on. Um and so I really wanted to kind of read her story just and hear everything going on from her perspective. I listened to this on audiobook, and honestly, I had a really great time. I didn't read it cuz I try not to rate memoirs, but I think Britney Spears, just like as a person, like the way she narrated it was very entertaining. Like I think she's just like a funny, quirky kind of woman. Her story is devastating, and truly I don't remember a lot of the details, but I do remember it being like an emotional roller coaster of like, wow, she's like really funny, and the way that she describes things and says things so bluntly is very entertaining. Um but I also recognize that like her story and what she's gone through was something I don't think anyone would ever want to go through, or anything that anyone should go through. And so overall I enjoyed reading it. It was definitely just a testament of like her strength and her resilience. The third book that I read in 2024 was The Fury by Alex Michaelides. I read that book because I read The Silent Patient. I loved that book, and I felt like I read another book. I think it was The Guest List by Lucy Foley that I thought had a similar premise to this one. So I thought I was really going to enjoy it. And unfortunately, this book absolutely flopped for me. I gave it 2.5 stars. I think the overall premise of the story was interesting, but the narrator of the book, like the way Alex Michaelides wrote the narrator, was extremely, extremely annoying. Like, he would tell a story and then he'd be like, but wait, you didn't know this, or you thought I was going this way, but I got a little too passionate. Let me try that again. Um, but yeah, he was like, oh, you thought I was gonna go this direction, but I'm actually like gonna say this. And that was just like very annoying. It was like, it was just like too much. And so it just definitely took me out of the story and just made me not enjoy it. So that was 2.5 stars. And then the fourth book that I read was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I'm pretty sure everyone has heard about this book. I was a little late jumping on the train, but I'm so happy I got on the train. I probably got on the last car, but I made it to the train. This book, 5 stars. What do I like need to say about this book that hasn't already been said? This book was gutting, extremely emotional, extremely devastating, but it was beautiful. And I feel like if you're someone who doesn't enjoy reading, even though it's a thicker book, I would still recommend it just because of just how dynamic the story is and how emotionally connected you feel to the characters. And there was a devastating event that happens in this book that gutted me. But then that's kind of how I knew that the book was a 5 stars. If I could feel so strongly about a fictional character, then I'm like, okay, automatic 5 stars. And then the fifth book that I read was Ruthless Vows. Who wrote that book? I don't even know who wrote it, but regardless, I read it, and I gave it 4 stars. I read Divine Rivals the year before, and I think I gave it 3 stars because I expected it to be a lot more than what it was. Like Divine Rivals, the story was good, but I found it to be a little bit boring. But I think that's just because I came in with an expectation. Um, that was wrong. And so I feel like after reading Divine Rivals, I kind of was like, okay, I kind of know who these characters are. I kind of know the author's writing style. Even though it's a slower pace, it's like if I know that going in, then I can appreciate it more. And I did. I really loved the story, the two characters. It was beautiful. And so it was 4 stars. And then I read Lessons in Chemistry. I gave it 3 stars. Honestly, this book was kind of disappointing. I feel like it was hyped up so much and so many people loved it and so many people have raved about it. But to me, it just fell a little flat. I just wasn't really connected to the story and the characters. I didn't love the writing. And yeah, I think that was just it. It's like the way people described it is like, oh, this STEM book about a woman in like the 50s and um how she like deals with sexism, but then she starts her own cooking show. Like, it's like, yes, that's what the book is about, but I don't know what it was. Just for me, there just was like a disconnect. And I also think there needs to be like a trigger warning in this book because I feel like some very like violent things happen, and I was not warned that it was going to happen in the book. And it definitely was just like a very visceral reaction of like, what the hell did I just read? And I did not appreciate that. Like, I wish I kind of got that warning beforehand. And so this is just my warning. Like, there is something very traumatic um that happens in this book. And so I feel like if you are reading it for like a light and fluffy, not a light and fluffy read, but just like, oh, a read about like historical fiction about a woman like combating sexism, like it's definitely not just that. Um and so I think because of that, I just didn't really like the book as much as I thought I was going to. And then the next book that I read, okay, so the next book that I read, it was February. I'm getting into February reads now. I'm going to say it from now, my book of the year. My book of the year. Um, and that book is The Mothers by Britt Bennett. I decided to pick up this book because I read The Vanishing Half by that author and I love The Vanishing Half, so I figured I would love this book. And oh, everyone needs to read this book. Like, this book was incredible, amazing. I literally finished this book and I called my mom right after to tell her how much, like, I love you, I appreciate you so much, because that book was just so emotional. And it's basically just about this like young girl who loses her mother, and she just doesn't have the best life. So she leaves, to go. She's like, I just want to leave everything in my town behind, leave, just go and search for something better. But then she ends up back in her town. And then it's kind of just about all the feelings and the emotions of like, you want to escape and get away somewhere, but like, you always just have that pull back home. And it was so emotional. And I think what made reading this so emotional to me actually was that when I read this was around the time of the Grammys, and I remember watching Luke Combs and Tracy Chapman perform Fast Car, and I became obsessed with the song. So I started listening to Fast Car as I was reading this book, and I think it really just like listening to Fast Car while reading The Mothers was just like almost like an out of body experience. Like I feel like that song encapsulates that book perfectly, and Fast Car makes me so emotional, and then reading The Mothers makes me so emotional, and then like consuming both those things together, it was just like waterworks, like all the way. Like I just couldn't believe it. Like it was just like a chilly experience. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like that I'm listening and reading these things that like fit so perfectly together. But yeah, that was The Mothers. I mean, 5 stars, obviously. Literally my favorite book of the entire year. It was absolutely phenomenal. Everyone should read it. And then the next book that I read was Homegoing by Ya Gyasi. I gave it 4.5 stars. This book, I thought it was really good. I love books about like family sagas and that take place across years and spans multiple generations. And then this is kind of what that book is. It like starts in Africa, and then it follows these like two, I think it's sisters or cousins, but it kind of just shows like how they both start in Africa, but they both end up getting like into very different circumstances. I think one sister ends up being like sold into slavery, I think, and then the other sister ends up being married to like this like big time like British trader, um and slave trader. And so it kind of just follows like how both of their families go, and like their family lines go in these like two separate directions, but then they end up crossing, and it's really cool. Definitely very interesting. I think the only thing that I didn't like was that I just didn't love the ending. Like I don't think the ending wrapped things up very well, but that was my only gripe with the book. It was 4.5 stars. And then I read The Misadventures of an Awkward Black Girl. This was a memoir. This is Issa Rae's memoir. I freaking love Issa Rae. She's one of my favorite just like celebrities, and I think she's literally a comedic genius. Like I love Insecure, and I think I think around that time I had finished watching Insecure for the first time, or like rewatching it. But I just think she's so funny, and I'm like I literally just want to like read or consume everything she has touched because I think she's so funny. So I read her memoir, and that was it. It was just funny. It was just very entertaining. I think if you're just looking for something short and funny to read, I would definitely recommend it. And actually, I would say that book is so interesting to me because it's like her memoir that she wrote before she really like blew up and got big. So it doesn't even mention anything about Insecure or all the work that she's done after like the Barbie movie and all the other success that she's had. Um so it was like kind of really interesting hearing her life and her perspective before like people really knew who she was. And then I read The Perfect Find by Tia Williams and A Love Song for Ricky Wilde by Tia Williams. And The Perfect Find I gave 4.5 stars. A Love Song for Ricky Wilde was 5 stars. I'm gonna talk about them both because I just want to like rant about how much I love Tia Williams. I read 7 Days in June last year, so I really wanted to read more of her other books. Um, and I really just think she's so underrated. Like I know she's popular and people know who you are, but I don't see enough people like talk about her books. I think she's a brilliant writer, and not just that, but I think her books are genuinely so funny. The Perfect Find, like I was literally audibly laughing out loud reading this book because of just how hilarious I found everything. Um like I think back to like certain things that she would write, and it's like this is so absurd and outlandish, but like why is this like actually hilarious? Like I loved it. And then A Love Song for Ricky Wilde, That book, I just loved it. It was so cool reading that book too because it took place in like present day, and it's like I was living in New York at the time for school that I was reading it, and it takes place in Harlem. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm in New York reading about this present day book in New York." I felt so immersed in the setting. It was great. Um but A Love Song for Ricky Wilde, I'm actually gave it 5 stars. I mean, I wasn't surprised that I liked it because I love Tyr Williams, but it has magical realism, and I don't typically love that because I don't read a lot of fantasy. But I thought the book was great. Okay, now we're entering the books that I read in March. And so the first book that I read was House Moms. I think this is by Jen Lancaster. And I read it just because I think it's just about a woman who like witnesses this like murder from someone from the mob. So she has to go into like witness protection, and she ends up at this like sorority house, and it kind of just follows like all the adventures that she has, I guess, with like the people that she meets. I gave this book 3 stars. I thought it was really good and entertaining, and I was like connected to the characters. It was just a light fun read. But I think I just gave it 3 stars because I feel like the end it ended so abruptly. There was no like neat tie up of the end. And when I actually read about like did a little more digging into this book after, I think the author said that this book was intended to be like a TV pilot that just never got picked up. So like she wrote a pilot for this TV show that didn't work out, so she just decided to turn it into a book, which makes sense because I feel like you read the book and it's like this is definitely supposed to continue. So I feel like I would almost like it to be a series. Like if she wrote another book in this universe with the same characters, I would read it because I just want to have like a nice conclusion. And I like the characters, but it just ended kind of abruptly. And then the next book that I read was Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. I gave that one 3 stars as well. I read When in Rome, which is like the first book in that little series that Practice Makes Perfect is in, and I really liked it. And so that kind of series takes place in this place called like Rome, Kentucky. Um, and the first book, When in Rome, was about the brother. So he has 3 sisters. So like each sibling is getting a book. So this is about his sister Annie. Um, and honestly, I gave it 3 stars. I liked it more than I thought I would because a lot of people said that this one wasn't their favorite. I liked it. I think the thing that like I really hated about this book though was that like Annie starts dating this kind she's like this goody two shoes, and she starts dating this like bad boy, I guess. Um and he's not even bad. He just has tattoos. He's not even bad. But um it's like it was just very irritating reading about like she's from this small town, and it's like all the people in the small town, they're all very close to each other, and they have a lot of opinions about her relationship. And they literally, okay, maybe this is a spoiler so you can skip like ahead 10 seconds, but like they all go ahead and vote on whether or not Annie should be dating this guy. And I'm like, why is this anybody's business? Like she's a grown woman. Like that was just so irritating. It actually made me hate all the people in the town because I'm like, if you think you have a say over the choices that she gets to make and you get to vote as to whether or not she gets to stay with this man, and if the vote is no, like she's just supposed to listen to you, like that's ridiculous. And so that's why it was a 3 star for me. But the third book in the series, Beg, Borrow, or Steal, comes out soon. um it might actually be out by the time I post this. So I am going to read it. I do love the world. I want to continue, but that was just what was really irritating about that book. And then I read First Lie Wins. I gave it 5 stars because, to be honest, like I gave it 5 stars because I couldn't really think of anything wrong with it. But when I look back at my reading experience, I'm like, it's kind of like a 3.5. Like it was good, but I truly could not even really tell you what it was about. It's a mystery thriller, and I think it's about this girl who has like a different identity, and I guess she's just trying not to get found out. It was fine. And then I read, oh, okay, and then I listened to We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is just like an essay, so I just listened to it on audiobook. Um, but it was great. I definitely enjoyed it. I I don't really know what to say. It was just literally just her thoughts on like feminism. I really enjoyed this author. I read Americana by her, and so I would like read her TED Talks and or listen to her TED Talks and like her interviews, and I think she's very smart. And so with this, I just kind of just wanted to hear like what she had to say, and I like that she kind of just gave like a very well-rounded view of feminism, of just like it's it's literally just like basic equality for women and men. Um and so I don't like remember all the details of this, but yeah, it was just a great like short thing to listen to and just to hear her thoughts about it from someone who I think is very wise. And then I read, okay, going into April, then I read The Last Word. I gave this 3 stars. Honestly, this book was disappointing because I heard so many people say that this book was generally so scary, and I just was not scared. I think it's about this woman who's in like an abandoned house. Um, and she like creepy things start happening. Oh, she leaves like a 1 star review on a book, and then the author of the book kind of replies to her, and then a bunch of creepy things start happening. So it's like obviously she thinks like the author is stalking her. And but it wasn't that scary to me. I think the real like devastating part of all of this was just like she's like isolated in this cabin because she's just like going through a lot of grief and tragedy. So finding out what that tragedy is, that's actually the real horror of the book. And you can kind of understand why she feels so despondent and just so depressed. But like it was interesting, but it just wasn't like really scary for me. And then what's next? The Dating Playbook. Okay, so I read The Dating Playbook by Farah Rashan. I gave it 4 stars. I really like the book. I don't know what else to say. This was part of like the Boyfriend Project series. It's about this like friend trio, so each friend gets her own book. So this is the second in the series. And it's about this like nutritionist and like trainer who I don't even really remember her name, to be honest, but like she's just, I think her name is Taylor actually, but like she's going through hard times financially, but she ends up somehow getting this like football player as like a client that she has to train, and they obviously end up falling in love, and so it kind of just follows her story. Honestly, I just find that whole like this whole world that like Vera Rashan wrote just really interesting. I love the three friends, and truly I feel like I love the romance, but I really feel like the true romance of the book is just like the friendship that the three women have with each other. Like that's what I read the books for. When the three of them are together, that's when the book is like fantastic. And but I just love reading about Black love too. So that was obviously a bonus of reading that book. And then I read once Okay. Then I read Summer in Savannah by, I think her name is Tara Shelton Harris. I think I just saw this in a bookstore and I thought the cover looked beautiful, so I picked it up. This book truly like ripped my heart out. It was a 5 star read for me. It's just basically about this woman who is um assaulted, and she ends up pregnant, and she ends up moving away. But I think what brings her back to her hometown, I think it's like her family is sick or someone in her family passed away. And so she ends up falling in love with like her abuser's brother. And it's just a very like it's like a romance, but it also touches so deeply on the concept of forgiveness. And I really enjoyed the book because it really just shows just like how complicated the dynamic of like forgiving someone doesn't mean forgetting, and you can try to move on from a tragedy while also like making room for the people like in your life. And it's kind of very interesting because it's like the abuser's brother falls in love with her, but like the abuser's brother's also trying to find a way to like find space for his brother in his life, especially as his brother is just about to get released from jail. So it's very interesting, but I think for me personally, just like as a Christian, like it was really cool and interesting to see those themes of forgiveness being um discovered for something that really is considered, and rightfully so, to be unforgivable. Um so that was One Summer in Savannah. I highly recommend everyone read that book. Then I read Darling Girls. I gave the book 4 stars. It's a thriller. People have rated this book pretty low, but for me, I really enjoyed it. Like, I thought it was very interesting. It's kind of about these three girls in foster care, but they go through a lot of abuse at the hands of their foster mother. And so the whole book is kind of just like unraveling what happens. And truthfully, I mean, it got me. Like, I found it to be very interesting. And I'm a social worker, so I just found the whole concept of like just even exploring the themes of like kids in foster care and how it's not always like a super positive experience. Um, to be interesting and something that I've never really read about before. So that was Darling Girls. It wasn't like necessarily this like super fast paced, like super mystery heavy. It was just more just like you're reading about these things that happen and then kind of just like a big twist happens at the end. But I thought it was interesting. Then I read The Inmate by Frida McFadden. Honestly, a lot of her books, I feel like a lot of people treat her books this way. They're just so quick to go through. And sometimes when I feel myself getting into a little bit of a slump, I like to read her books because I know I can get through them quickly. And so I read The Inmate by her. I thought it was super interesting. Um, I gave it 3 stars. I guess it was fine. I don't really remember what it was about. I feel like she keeps me on my toes because I thought I knew what the twist was and I really thought I got it. But then it's like the twist ended up being the original theory. And so, like, in a way, like the twist was like the most obvious solution, but it's like, of course, you never really want to think that like it will be that obvious. So my mind went somewhere else, and then it ended up being like, oh no, it's the most obvious thing. And I'm like, okay. And then I read Everybody Always by Bob Goff. I gave the book 5 stars. I mean, I feel like I read what was his other book called? Love Love Does. Um, and I kind of felt the same way about this book that I did with Love Does. That also got 5 stars, but I think his books just really inspired me to just go out and live life with the more positive attitude. And so I think every time I read his books and I think about them and reflect on them later on, I think it's just like really cool for me because I'm like, okay, this is like a man who really just lives his life to the fullest. That's what I want for my life, and to just find the joy in life, the joy that comes through a relationship with Jesus Christ that will compel me to keep moving forward, and finding more joy. And so that was Everybody Always. And then going into May, I read Late Bloomers. Truly, I think I picked up this book because I was just trying to read more books by Asian American authors. So I kind of read this book and I thought it would be interesting because it was like kind of described as like a family saga. But I gave it 2.5 stars. It was just kind of boring and dull for me, and I kind of hated every character, and I just thought the story was weird. And then I read Real Americans. That book I gave 4 stars. That again, that was like Family Saga, but like Family Saga didn't write. And so I really, really enjoyed it. I'm so happy that I read it. Um, Definitely very emotional, definitely like touches on a lot of concepts of like race, also features like an Asian American family, but just like race and like nepotism and privilege, and um kind of explore those themes, which I thought was pretty cool. And then I read The True Love Experiment. Truly, I just wanted to read another romance, and I really liked Christina Lauren's writing, and so um I was just like, okay, like let me just pick up another one of her books. I thought this book was really interesting. I think all of her books are. My thing with this book was more just like just I wasn't completely sold on the romance. Basically, it's about this author who ends up being the lead of like a reality dating show, but she ends up falling in love with like the producer of the show. But I think it would have been more interesting to me if like she genuinely felt like started to have strong feelings for like one of the men she was dating on the show while she was also falling for the producer. I think that would have made it a lot more interesting and a lot more tension as to like who's she gonna choose, who's she gonna decide. But I think because like she didn't really have a connection with any of the guys and she had more of a connection with the producer, obviously they have to try to save the show, but it was more just like, oh, like this would have been more fun, more drama if she was like falling in love with 2 people at once. But that's why I got 3.5 stars, but still a really good book. And then I read In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is just her memoir. Honestly, who recommended this book? Was it on Carly as well? I don't know, but it was just about, it's a memoir, but it kind of talks about her experience being a lesbian, or in a lesbian relationship, but like suffering abuse and how kind of like domestic violence isn't really talked about in the lesbian community. So I thought it was really interesting. She definitely is a writer. Like And I say it in the sense that it was just definitely very like not difficult to read, but very lyrical, very like telling like stories, like maybe I think if I my memory serves me correctly, like the way she would describe things almost seemed fictional, but it was to describe like a real life experience, but it was kind of just like, oh, this is interesting. Um but overall it was cool to read a different perspective. Okay, I'm gonna try to go through the rest of this so fast because the sun is setting. Hopefully I can finish this today. But then I read Mistakes Were Made, so this is going into June, and I'm gonna like lump June, July, August kind of all in one because I only read romance in the summer, and so I'm kind of just gonna talk about all the romance books that I read all at once. But first I read Mistakes Were Made. It was June Pride Month. I just wanted to read just like a queer romance. I thought this book was good, but it was just definitely an age gap about this like mom who goes to visit her daughter at like their family day at school. She ends up hooking up with a college student, and then the next day at breakfast, she finds out that like the college student she hooked up with was her daughter's roommate. And so for me, I'm just personally not really a fan of age gap romances, especially if like the age gap is like, oh, you could actually be my mom. Like, that's just weird to me. So, even though it was an entertaining book, I gave it 3.25 stars. Like, I felt like I couldn't really root for the romance for that reason. And then I read The Neighbor Favor by Christina Forrest. This is my discovery of Christina Forrest this year. I absolutely adored this book. I thought Lily and I think the male main character's name is Nick. They were just so adorable. And again, like it was just really cool because it takes place in New York and it took place like they were living in Union Square. And I'm like, that is so cool. Union Square is literally the station I would get off every single like multiple times a week to go to class. And so when I was in school at the time. And so it was just like really, really cool to kind of read a book that I'm like, oh my God, like they literally live like where I go every single day. Um, so that was really, really cool. But I just loved this book. It was just so wholesome, so sweet. I really loved it too because they're both two bookish people, and I really feel like I saw myself a lot in Lily. Um, in the sense that she's just like such a homebody. Getting too passionate again, but she's just like a homebody who loves to read. Um, and so I just thought the romance was just so adorable, and just everyone should read this book. And it's Black love. You know, she ends up falling in love with her favorite author. It was just great. And then I read Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. I gave it 4.25 stars. I don't typically read YA, but I just heard so many people raving and talking about this book that I was just like, okay, let me try it for myself. And I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was so cute. Enemies to Lovers, high school. I found it very engaging, very interesting. And so um, that was Better Than the Movies. And then I read Honey and Spice. And this book is kind of just like a college romance. It takes place in London or England, somewhere in England. Um, Again, it's Black love, and so I that's kind of why I decided to read it. I thought it was interesting. My only issue with this book is that our female main character was just kind of annoying. What did I rate this book? 3.5 stars. um our female main character was just kind of annoying. She has this like radio show, but she's very just like anti-man, but she kind of ends up being a hypocrite because a lot of the things that she like chastises men for doing or that she tells women like stay away from men, she ends up doing it herself. And on one hand, it's like, yes, like I'm all for complicated and dynamic characters. Like not everyone's perfect, but it was kind of just like annoying how she's like, oh yeah, all men suck. But it's like, why are you judging other girls when you're literally simping over this man? Like that's kind of annoying. And she just gave like a very arrogant, I think her and her friends just gave off like kind of like arrogant vibe, which I just didn't love. Like there was no humility. It's like humble yourself, princess. um and then I read Under One Roof, Stuck with You, and then Below Zero. This was a series of novellas under by Ali Hazelwood. They're all in like kind of one book. But I read Under One Roof. I gave 3 stars. Stuck with You 1.5, and then Below Zero 3.5 stars. Honestly, they were kind of just quick reads to get through. I thought all of them were fine. Below Zero was definitely the best one, the most mature one. Stuck with You, I will say, I Am That Book's Biggest Enemy. I hated that novella. It was the female main character was so annoying. I was not sold on the romance at all. It was just like very spicy. and I just didn't like it. It just wasn't my favorite. And then I read Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. I gave it 4 stars. I feel like it's a very spicy book, and it's basically about this like scientist who kind of has beef with like one of the leads of this company that's trying to buy the place that she works at. But they end up in this like forbidden romance, and I kind of knew going into it that it was going to be more erotic, and so I think I just skipped most of the spice scenes. I know a lot of people took points off because of how spicy it was, but for me, I think because I knew that going in, it didn't take away from the experience. And it's like, yes, could I have used a little bit more of an emotional connection between the two characters? Of course, but I think also hearing their backstory and kind of understanding why, um, they're so emotionally closed off, like it makes sense to me. And so that was Under One Roof. Oh no, that was not Under One Roof. That was Not in Love. And then I read The 7 Year Slip. I gave it 3.5 stars. Again, I think New York tends to be romanticized, but I do think books set in New York can just be magical. Like it is a really magical place to explore. Um and so I just love the backdrop. I love the theme of like, oh, the male main character is a chef, and so just all these descriptions of food and it's magical realism. This book did let me down. I know it's a very, very hyped up book. For me, I just wasn't completely sold on like the connection between the two characters, but um overall, like I did really enjoy reading it, and I thought it was just like very atmospheric, and that's just what I love the most about it. And then I read Love Interest by Claire Gilmore. I think that's the name of the author. I gave it 4.75 stars. I read it because Haley Pham raved about it, and I can completely see why. This book was incredible. Again, I don't live in New York anymore, but I think that if there was any book that would make me want to move back, it was this book, because I just think the vibes, the atmosphere, it was just so incredible and amazing. And I just loved reading it. And I think not just that, but I was sold on the love story. Like it was believable. I completely understood why these characters would be together, and it made me want to root for them. Like I was rooting for our two main characters to get together. I didn't love the ending, and I think that's why it wasn't a complete 5-star read for me. But it was like it's perfect. Otherwise, it's a perfect book. It's workplace romance, takes place in New York, and it's like like it's a realistic romance, and so I loved it. And then I read Flawless by Elsie Silver. Um, I'll talk about the 3 books in the Chestnut Spring series that I read just all at once. I read Flawless, Heartless, Powerless. Flawless 4 stars, Heartless 3.5, Powerless 2. Flawless, I thought it was fine, definitely very spicy, but I found it entertaining. All those books are kind of, again, they're just the Chestnut Springs series. It's all about cowboy romance. When Flawless, I think it's about this girl Summer, who's the sports agent to this bull rider, and they end up falling in love. And then Heartless is um a woman, Willa, who ends up being the nanny for this guy named Cade's son, and Cade is um the male main character in Flawless's brother. I think his name is Bo, but they end up falling in love. I really liked Willa as a character. I thought she was great. And then Powerless, I hated that book. I'm so sorry. This book follows Jasper and Sloane. Sloane is Cade and Bo's cousin, but Jasper is like their best friend, basically their brother. But this book I just was not sold on at all. I feel like I can make a whole video on like the issues that I had with this book. It was just not believable to me at all. I was like, there are just so many loose ends that just never got tied up. She like runs away, Sloane runs away from her wedding. Jasper's like her best friend, and he rescues her, and then they end up on this whirlwind romance, but it was definitely very spicy. Um, and I think that both characters were just kind of dumb. I hated Jasper as a character. I thought he was actually pretty disrespectful. And I think I didn't like this book because I think the line of consent got blurred, which I hate. And so I just feel like I don't really find like super masculine men like, oh, go on your knees, crawl, and all that stuff that he was saying was so cringy, and I find that disgusting. And so I hated that book. 2 stars. The only reason why it wasn't a 1 star is because there were some quotes in the book that I thought were actually beautiful, but that was it. And it was like kind of an age gap. I mean, all of them are age gappy, I guess. So is Heartless. But Will and Kate, I didn't mind that much. But this one, I just thought it was weird. I just thought it was definitely very weird. I'm like, what is Sloane doing for her career? Literally, what are they doing? Jasper, get a therapist. Like, please. Like, I will be your therapist. Please. Like, why are we engaging in toxic behavior? This is weird. And so the next book that I'm talking about is The Hookup Plan. This is the last book in like that boyfriend project trilogy that I was talking about earlier. This is about the third friend. I think her name is London, but she ends up like meeting an old flame at a high school reunion, or not an old flame, like an enemy. But of course, it's enemies to lovers. They end up falling in love. This book was interesting because London's a doctor, and then I think her enemy from high school is like actually running an audit on her hospital. So, yeah, there's just like kind of tension with that. She doesn't fully trust him. But again, kind of like I talked about with the dating playbook earlier, I really just think this book shines when the three best friends are together. I feel like overall the series less about the men, more about the sisterhood, which I love. And then I read The Partner Plot by Christina Forrest. This is about Lily's sister Violet, and then actually their third sister, Iris. Her book comes out soon, which I'm so excited to read. But The Partner Plot basically follows Violet. She's a celebrity stylist, and so it kind of just talks about like how she rekindles like a romance with her old high school boyfriend. And so it was just definitely very very cute to read. One thing about Christina Forrest's books that I love is that like she paces her books very very well. So it's excellent pacing. I feel like it's never too fast or too slow, and like the flow of the romance is like very realistic, which I love. And then I read The Paradise Problem by Christina Forrest. Love this book, 4.75 stars. This book was great. I thought it was really cool. Just like the setting was very atmospheric. It's about this like girl who is in this like fake marriage, and she has to go to her fake husband's like family's wedding so he can get his inheritance. And it's just his family, they're like this ultra rich family, and they're actually the worst, but she's just very down to earth and she's hilarious. So I loved her as a character. I liked their romance as well. It definitely was fast, but it still felt realistic. Again, I just didn't love the ending. Like I just felt like the ending was too fast and just the pacing was a little bit off. But that was my only issue with the book. I thought it was great. I thought it was super atmospheric. The wedding takes place in like this tropical paradise, and so just the setting very atmospheric. I loved it. And then I read The Cheat Sheet. That book was really, actually no it wasn't, what am I talking about? I read The Cheat Sheet and The Rule Book by Sarah Adams. I didn't like either of them. I gave both of them 2.5 stars. I just thought the female main character in both books was so immature that I was like, are these like adult women? Like seriously? Like I know Sarah Adams likes to write more quirky female characters, which is fine, but I'm like, you can write quirky and not immature, and they were just immature. I loved the male main characters, but I just felt like the female main characters were so immature, so high school, honestly middle school, that it just like completely just took me out of the story. um and then I read, oh, and then I listened to Under Your Spell. This was just like a random audiobook that I got off of Book of the Month. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. But I really couldn't tell you what it was about. I think it took me like a whole month to get through this, and by the end I just finished listening to it because I just wanted it to be over. Um I truly couldn't even really tell you what it was about. It was fine. It was just fine. And then I read Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan, my first Kennedy Ryan book, and now I'm a Kennedy Ryan girly. I love this book. This book was beautiful. It's about this couple, Yasmin and Josiah. They're divorced, and the reason why they're divorced is because of this like extremely tragic personal tragedy that they go through. And so they kind of are navigating, they already have 2 kids together, so they're kind of, and they run a business, they own a business together, so they're trying to navigate that. But of course they rekindle their love and fall in love. But I love this book. I feel like it really emphasized the importance of healing and like not being too hard on yourself and allowing yourself to move on and find just joy and, yeah, healing despite thinking everything is your fault. And it emphasized like going to therapy, which I loved. And so I feel like that was just the true message of the story, not just the romance, but like, can we forgive ourselves? Not just each other, can we forgive ourselves? And then I read The Friend Zone, The Happy Ever After Playlist, and Life's Too Short. The Friend Zone I gave 3.75 stars. Happy Ever After Playlist I gave 3.5 stars. And Life's Too Short 4.25 stars. Honestly, I'm going to talk about them all in one because they're all interconnected standalones. They all exist in the same universe. Honestly, I thought all of her books were like very entertaining. I just think my issue with those books is that they get a little dark. And while I appreciate depth in a story, sometimes it's just like, okay, this is a little bit too much. And it's like you could have a very, and I feel like I noticed this trend in her books, it's like you can have a romance, everything's going great, it's fine, and then boom, at the end, boom, tragedy, boom, heartbreak. And it's like, was this necessary? Abby Jimenez is a very popular author, I recognize that, but I just think that, I don't know. I don't like, I think her stories are interesting and I'm engaged, but like all her romances feel a little bit too insta lovey for me. And I'll just go talk about the other books of hers that I read: Part of Your World, Yours Truly, Just for the Summer. All of those got 3.5 stars. It follows the same theme. Like, again, cute romance, but it just feels very insta lovey and unnecessary tragedy. And it's hard because I know people go through dark things. So in that sense it's realistic, but sometimes I'm like, I want a romance to escape. Like, I don't really want that. And I feel like it's like her books are marketed as more fluffy reads. And I'm like, they're really not. Like, I actually think don't read her books if you're not in a great place in your life, because I think honestly, kind of reading her books just made me kind of sad. So that was Abby Menace. And then I'll talk about the other books that I read in the summer. One Star Romance by Laura Hankin. 3.5 stars for me. I really liked it. To be honest, this was definitely more lit fic than romance, which I enjoy. I actually enjoyed like the story as a whole. Like, I thought it was very interesting. It's just about this girl who writes a book, and but she's like the maid of honor at her best friend's wedding, but the best man wrote a 1 star review of her book. But it kind of takes place like over multiple years because obviously their maid of honor and best man and their friends are still married, so they have to see each other like over the years. Um and of course like they end up falling in love, but I feel like the book was like interesting, and I liked and I enjoyed reading it, but I just wasn't really sold on the romance. I was like, I don't really get, like, I understand they have a connection, but like not enough to where they would like want to go all in, like all the way, like the way they did. And so I just wasn't completely sold on that. And then last book I'll talk about for the summer is Funny Story by Emily Henry, The Queen She Did Again. This was a 5 star read for me. This is probably one of my favorite Emily Henry books. It was marketed as like the girl, I think her name was Daphne, and it was like Jess from New Girl, and the guy Miles was like Nick, and that sold me immediately because New Girl is my favorite show literally of all time. And they were so right. Like, Daphne is so Jess, Miles is so Nick. Their story was so cute, it was so realistic. Basically they both get dumped by their significant others. Like, their significant others leave them to date each other, but so they need a place to stay, so they end up living with each other. And you just get to see it blossom. Like the pacing was so good and it was so realistic. It wasn't insta lovey. Like, you get to see them genuinely blossom from like these heartbroken people to these people that like have a genuine friendship that morphs into romance. It was beautiful, super funny. I saw myself a lot in Daphne. She's a bookish girly. I just loved it. And okay, so oh my god, we got these summer books. Let's go through the rest of the books from the rest of the year. I know I can do this. I know I can do this. Okay. So, okay, I did a little more light. I don't know if that's better, but whatever. Okay, and then I read Just Last Night by Mara McFarlane. I gave this book 4 stars. This is, we're going into September now. I read this book because Haley Pham raved about it. Honestly, I really enjoyed this book. I just think like the little blurb on the back of the cover makes it think it's gonna be like a rom-com. It's really not. Like, it's about this girl who is in love with her like best friend, and I thought it was just gonna be like, oh, maybe they'll get together. The book took a completely different turn. something very tragic happens in this book that's like the centerpiece of the whole novel of just like navigating grief. And then the romance that happens is unexpected. So yes, it was nice to read. It definitely read very Sally Rooney vibes, which I enjoy Sally Rooney, so that wasn't an issue, but it was more just like, oh, this wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But I feel like now that I know how Mari McFarlane's writing is, um I feel like I can go into the rest of her novels with a more realistic expectation and maybe enjoy them more. But it was still really good. And then I read This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. This is like book 2 in the Before I Let Go kind of series. The main character Yasmin in Before I Let Go has two best friends, Soledad and Hendrix. So they're each getting their own book as well. This is Soledad's book. And then Hendrix's book is coming out this year. But This Could Be Us follows Soledad. She, like, her husband kind of sucks and basically ends up going to prison, and so she has to end up rebuilding her life as like a single mom with 3 girls. And honestly, she's just a boss. Like, truly, there's a romance in this book, but I didn't even really care about it that much. I think that's why it got 4.5 stars, because yes, I thought the romance that happens between Soledad and this other character was cute, but it wasn't really like, I was rooting for them, but it wasn't like super believable, like how like, I guess, quickly things happen. Um or like their connection. Like, I wasn't completely sold on the intensity of their connection, even though I wanted them to be together, if that makes sense. But truly, it was just like amazing, just reading about the support that Soledad gets from her friends, and just seeing her be a boss and like figure out like, okay, how to make money, how am I gonna raise my kids, how am I gonna keep them in their school, because they live in like an affluent community, and their kids go to private school, or her kids go to private school. So that was just like a very, like, just really encouraging thing to read about, honestly. And the next book that I read was Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. I gave it 4 stars. I don't even know why I rated this book, because it's nonfiction. I read Evicted by this author. I think it was either last year or the year before, and I really enjoyed it. And so he is a sociologist, and he focuses a lot of his work on just like poverty. And I really liked this book because I feel like his whole premise is like, poverty happens because like we in America tolerate it. So like, even when we elect politicians or people or politicians, and even just both sides, Democrats, Republicans, talk about poverty, it's not like taken seriously enough, and there's so much focus on like the middle class, which is important, but at the same time it's like, okay, but what about the people who are below middle class, who are actually like dirt poor? Like, they actually don't get a lot of focus and attention, I feel like, just in America at all. And it's like, we've become so, it's like we see homeless people on the street, and it's like, oh, we feel so bad for them, but it's like we allow that to happen because we don't push for policies and change that will actually make people who are in those situations lives better. I think for me, I appreciated that because it challenged me to really think about like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, we've all become so complacent and just tolerating poverty because it's not something that like directly affects me, or I'm sure a lot of people. It's kind of just something that looks like, okay, I'm on the outside just like looking at this, but it's like, no, like, real dramatic, extreme, like, societal change needs to happen in order to fix this issue. I think I gave it 4 stars. To be honest, I shouldn't have even rated this. I think maybe just because it was a little bit hard to read, it was a little bit textbooky, but it definitely was not as easy to read as Evicted, but still, I think, a great learning experience for me to read that. And then the next book I read was Honey by Isabel Banta. I think this is just like a fictional story, just about this like pop star in the 90s and just like her rise to fame. And I just find stories like that interesting. So I read it, and it was cool. It wasn't like fantastic. Like, I wasn't super engrossed or riveting, but I think it was entertaining for what it was. And okay, so that was Honey. And now we're going into October. I read Anita de Monte, Laughs by Sochi Gonzalez. I think that's her name. I read Olga Dies Dreaming by her, I think like 2 years ago. So it was really cool to see that she has another book. And I really, really like this book. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was just so cool. It's about this like university student who kind of ends up getting caught up in this relationship, but they're both artists. And then she ends up hearing about this woman, Anita de Monte, and she ends up reading about her story, and it sounds eerily similar to hers. And so I just think the themes of like spirituality, like race, class, like all of that was explored in this novel, and I just found it to be really interesting, and I thought it was great. So that was Anita De Monte. De Monte. So Demonte, I think it's Demonte. And then I read Night Bane by Alex Astor. I read Lightlark a few years ago. I think I reread Lightlark at some point too. Um, Nightbane was 3 stars. I feel the same way about Nightbane as I do with Lightlark. Like, I'm gonna continue the series, but I just think that, like, in my opinion, I don't think Alex Astor writes the stories very well. They're very entertaining, which is why I enjoy reading them. So it's like I enjoy reading them from an entertainment standpoint. I think I did like Lightlark more, but I just think that like she has a lot of loose ends in her books that she just, in my opinion, doesn't really tie up very well. So I just think that like it kind of just ends up being just kind of weird to read because I'm like, oh, there's like all this stuff going on. Um, but it's like she throws in all these little subplots and it's like, okay, nothing is really getting resolved. So like, what's up? Um, but overall it was fine. Then I read The Boyfriend, 3.75 stars. Another Frida McFadden book. The twist got me, so I think that's just why I rated it high. I think for me, I kind of realized this about myself this year, but I'm not really that much of a mystery thriller person. But I think it's like I am also very easy to fool. So if there's any twist that's unpredictable to me, then it'll immediately get above a 3 star. And so I thought, yeah, that's kind of like all my thoughts. I don't really remember a lot of details about it, but I thought it was cool. Then I read The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. I really, really appreciated this book. As someone who's a Christian and who's kind of gone through my own journey of like questioning my faith, like I love seeing intellectual arguments as to why other people believe in God. I mean, Timothy Keller, rest in peace. Like, he was a very famous pastor, but I think the way he approaches, just like even his explanations as to why he thinks Christianity is true is just very refreshing because he comes off so humble and not arrogant. And I think that if you're someone who isn't a Christian, who has a negative view of Christianity, I think you would appreciate his work because he comes off in a very non judgmental way and also in a way that it's like, okay, I understand doubt and doubting is okay and there's room for it, which I appreciate. So that was The Reason for God. I really enjoyed that book. I gave it 5 stars. Then I read Long After We Are Gone by Tara Shelton Harris because I loved One Summer in Savannah. I thought I would love this book because it's also about a family saga. Unfortunately, I say what I gave it? I think I gave it 2 stars. Um yeah, unfortunately, this just like didn't hit for me. I really wasn't connected to the story or any of the characters at all. It's just about this family who their dad dies, but they have a lot of land and a company is trying to buy that land from them, but they're like, no, we don't want to sell it. And I thought it was interesting because it kind of touched upon this like topic of something that I didn't even really know about how back in like slavery days, or not even like even after slavery, um, black people would own land, but like it would be passed down generationally but not the title. So it's like even though the original owner of the land was a family member and it got passed down to family, because there was no like clear title that was passed down, it kind of gave reason for these big corporations to kind of steal that land from them and then build like resorts and hotels. And so that's kind of what is the predicament in this book, but I just thought it was going to be a lot more dramatic than what it was and a lot more emotional than what it was. And I kind of felt a little bit detached from the story, unfortunately. Okay, let's finish. Excuse the lighting, and my microphone died. So I had to take a pause to charge it. Now it's dark. So let's just get into the rest of the books. I think I left off of Family Reservations. This book is about like this mom who's this super famous like chef and restaurateur, but it's like family drama because she has three daughters who all have like a role in the business, but the mom kind of sucks and she kind of pits her daughters against each other. So it's kind of just like this fight about the business. I have that I gave it 3 stars, and if I'm being completely honest, I feel like looking back, it's a 2 star. I didn't really enjoy it. So I don't know if I'd really recommend it. But that was that. And then I read A Set on You. I gave that book 4 stars. This was by Amy Leah. This book is just so cute. I kind of was getting into a little bit of a slump, so I just wanted like a fun romance to read. And this definitely did the trick, and it's part of a series. So I'm so excited to, keep reading the rest of the series. This book is basically just about this like fitness influencer who like preaches a lot about body positivity, and she has a gym enemy. I wonder what happens with her and her gym enemy. I think we know the answer. But yeah, it was definitely very cute. I just loved it. It was great. And then I read Dinner for Vampires. I try not to rate memoirs. That might change in the new year, but I didn't give it a rating. But if I were, this would definitely be 5 stars. This is by Bethany Joy Lenz, who was one of the main characters in One Tree Hill. And honestly, I feel like I was destined to read this book because I literally had no idea who she was. I think I saw this in like a book of the month pick, so I just decided to listen to the audio of the audiobook version, and it was incredible. Like, it's literally so shocking, just like her story about how she like ended up in a cult, um but like she ended up on this like hit TV show at the same time. And it's like, I've heard of One Tree Hill, but literally before reading this book, I'd never watched the show, didn't even know who she was. So just like hearing her story and just hearing her reflections on like faith, but then also just like manipulation and abuse and like standing your ground and just feeling vulnerable, like it just felt like so human, like the epitome of a human experience. And so definitely completely enjoyed reading that book. Then I read An American Marriage. This book I'd had on my radar for a while, but it was unfortunately pretty disappointing. I gave it 3 stars. And honestly, when I look back, I would probably rate it lower. I think I appreciated this book in that its messaging was like complicated. Like, it kind of is about this black couple, and the husband ends up going to prison because he's falsely accused of a crime. And so it kind of just follows him and his wife, and his wife is like, well, he originally was sentenced for a really long time. It's like, I don't know if I can wait for you. When she kind of ends up falling in love with her childhood best friend, but then her husband ends up getting released early, and when he comes back, he wants her, but it's kind of like she's already moved on, and there's kind of drama with that. And I don't know, I just felt like I'd heard about this book for so long, and I had so many expectations for it, and it kind of just fell flat for me. And so that was An American Marriage. And then I read Sociopath, the memoir. I listened to this on Audible, and honestly, I just read it. I heard it kind of like circling around, and I heard quite a few people talking about it. And it just sounded so interesting to me. I feel like when you hear the word sociopath, you immediately think evil. And so it was just like definitely very interesting to kind of um like read this book and kind of like hear, oh, like sociopath doesn't automatically mean evil, and she has a husband and a son, and she does struggle. Like, she does talk about how it's not easy, and it kind of, I feel like I read it because I just wanted to gain more empathy, and I definitely did that. And I feel like, again, there's just so many levels to the human experience, and everyone is suffering with different things, and things that people may be suffering with that you may consider evil, it could end up being like a real like devastating struggle for that person. And I don't even want to keep saying using the word struggle, but just like something to work through that other people don't have to work through. And so I definitely liked listening to this book because I think it just gave me a new perspective, which I appreciated. And then I read Open Water by, I think, Caleb Azuma Nelson. I read this because I heard Jack Edwards recommend this book, and honestly, I feel like I don't know. I I feel like personally it just didn't hit the way that I wanted it to. It's kind of just like most literary fiction is just like a lens into a fictional character's life, which is just what I like about it. But I felt like for me, this book wasn't really giving enough. I didn't give it a rating because I really felt like I couldn't. It wasn't a bad book by any means, but I think it's kind of just focuses on these two people, mainly this male character in London. They're both black, and it's kind of just talks about their experience being black in London, and just like the racism that they face, and kind of the trauma that like the racism that they experience and that they've seen other people experience, how it's affected them. And I think it's important like to talk about that sort of thing, but for me, I don't know, I just didn't feel super connected to the novel. um and then I read The Story Life of AJ Fikry. This was a complete 180 because I gave this book 5 stars. I had heard so many people talking about it on BookTube, and truthfully, like almost like the mothers, like this book, I literally was sobbing at the end. Like I was sobbing, but this book was incredible. It was so fast paced. Like I feel like I flew through the book, and it was just so emotional. I don't know, like Gabrielle Zevin, she just really knows how to do it. Like I was excited to read this book, but I was still a little bit skeptical. It's about this like just like old man who is very grumpy, but he ends up getting people into his life that kind of turn him around. And but yeah, he just ends up being this really funny, quirky, lovable character that you just can't help but adore. And then I listened to Worthy by Jada Pinkett Smith. I feel like Dinner for Vampires put me on like a memoir kick where I realized I love listening to memoirs as opposed to reading them, because there's just nothing like hearing another person tell their own story. So I listened to Worthy, and oh my gosh, like I'm ashamed to admit that like I really didn't know a lot about Jada Pinkett Smith before reading this book. Like I really only knew her as Will Smith's wife and Jaden Smith's mom. I had no idea that she has, like, again, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but it's like I truly had no idea she has her own acting career. Like she was super well known and had booked all these roles before even meeting Will Smith. And so it was just like so interesting listening to her life, and I feel like she's such a badass, and it was actually great for me to hear her story because I feel like she gets made fun of a lot in the media. Um, but even listening to her story and listening to her and Will Smith's relationship now, it was definitely very interesting. It almost makes me like ashamed that like even I participated. Like I never said anything online, but just even my point of view, I'd be like, oh my god, like she's kind of crazy, or she's just like a little weird for how she talks about Will Smith, and it's like, no, she's not. It's like everyone is painting her out to be this way, but it's really not the truth. So I really appreciated just getting to hear her life from her perspective. I had no idea she was a drug dealer in Baltimore when she was a kid. Like she had gone through so much and so much trauma, and just even like listening to her talk about her healing journey and how she realized that she just needs to realize that she's worthy of love and just like a good life. It was definitely beautiful to listen to. So that was Worthy. And then I listened to, oh no, I didn't listen to, I read The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. I read The True Love Experiment earlier, like I spoke about. But this is kind of like the first book in the little duology, I guess. And I enjoyed it. I mean, it wasn't like my favorite. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was good, but again, like I just felt like the romance was a little too quick for me, so I wasn't completely sold. And um, I think because I read The True Love Experiment first, I had an expectation of what I thought this book was going to be, and it didn't fully meet it. Again, it's still incredibly entertaining, but it just didn't really hit the same for me. And then I read Five Survive. This was the last book that I read in November. I think I gave this book like 3.5 stars. Honestly, I feel like I almost DNF'd this book. It was kind of hard for me to get through. I found it just a little bit dull, and it was just like it was kind of disappointing because I love the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. Um by Holly Jackson, and so I was like really excited to read this book by hers, but it kind of just fell a little bit flat to me, and I think I know why. I think I realized with my mysteries and thrillers, I like to read about like there's an event that already happened and we have to like find out and gather clues as to like who did it or what was the motive or what was the reason. Five Survive was more something is actively happening right now. Some dark stuff is actively happening right now, and we need to figure out what it is. I realize that I just don't like that as much. It's not that interesting to me. I feel like it was kind of bordering on like a 2.5, maybe low three for me. But then I think the ending, I kind of feel like I guess the twist a little bit. I was a little proud of myself, but I feel like the ending was good enough for me and wrapped up itself to where I was like, okay, this is not that bad. But it definitely is not my. It's probably my least favorite Holly Jackson book. And okay, going into December, I read The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. I had heard so many people talking about Kristen Hanna this year, and as someone who loves history, and I feel like into this new year, 2025, I want to just read more general history in general and read more historical fiction. I realize I love historical fiction. So I was kind of excited to kind of dive into Kristen Hanna because I know that a lot of her books are historical fiction books. And so I read The Four Winds. I thought it was great. I loved it. 5 stars. I was literally crying. Like, again, any book that just gets that reaction out of me, it's like immediate 5 stars. Like, I was sobbing. It was so sad. And I think I appreciate Kristen Hanna because I think she takes these historical events, like The Four Winds kind of takes place in like the Great Depression, Dust Bowl era. Um, but I feel like she takes these life events and she centers it on the women. I feel like in history class, like a lot of the historical figures that we learn about are men. And I mean, I feel like we typically don't even get really like what was the day in a life like for a typical person living in that era. That's not really something I feel like that's typically taught in a history class. It's more just like big historical events and historical figures. So I thought it was cool that she kind of took us in, that she did a lot of research to take us in, like, what is a real day in the life of like someone who lives in this time period. And not just that, but just like what a woman does. And I feel like in history in general, just women just get the short end of the stick. And I'm not even saying that to be on like some type of soapbox, but it's more just like I think, especially when we even think about historical figures, it's a lot of men, and there's not a lot of focus on the immense role that women played in that time period and the struggles that they had to go through. So I appreciate that she is trying to shine a light on that with her novels. And then I read Listen for the Lie. I gave that 4.25 stars. I really enjoyed that book. I kind of read it and listened to it on Audible because it's kind of like a podcasty format book, which I thought was really cool. Um, but yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed this book. I kind of realized like mystery thrillers aren't my favorite. I'm very picky with what I enjoy. But I kind of realized I'm like, you know what? Sometimes I would feel dumb for not guessing the plot twist, but I actually, for me, when I read like a mystery thriller, I'm like, I'm not trying to guess the plot twist. Like, I'm just reading just so I can see what happens. I like looking at the clues and I'm like, oh, I wonder where this is gonna lead. But for me, I'm like trying to put in all this effort to guess what's happening. I'm like, it just takes me out of the reading experience. I'm like, I don't care if I don't know what happens before I read it, because I think if it's a big shocking twist, it makes me enjoy the reading experience more. So I did read Listen for the Lie. I thought it was great. I thought I had an idea of what the twist would be. Like I wasn't like actively trying to guess, but I kind of had my thoughts and I was kind of right. So I was a little bit proud of myself, but at the same time, even if I wasn't, like it still would have been um a great experience. And then I listened to Over the Influence. This is JoJo's book, Joanna Levesque. Um Very cool. I thought it was great that she put out a memoir. I know that she's one of those iconic singers from the early 2000s, and it's like a lot of people like love her, but she's not like she's still famous, but she's not like I guess as radio hit as she was when she was younger. So a lot of people kind of want to know like what happened, and I know there are big gaps in between her releasing music as well. So it was great to kind of just hear her tell her side of the story. It was great to kind of hear her talk about her faith and just her life and the struggles that she's gone through and a lot of the trauma that she's experienced with like alcoholism and her family, and just the role that addiction and that sort of thing played in her life. I appreciate her being so vulnerable to share that, because it definitely was pretty cool to kind of read her story and um, hear her perspective. And then I read The Reappearance of Rachel Price. Again, I mean, I thought it was great. I actually really loved this book. I think I gave it like 4.75 stars. It wasn't quite a 5 star, but it was definitely amazing. And again, I think it took me like to true like why I love Holly Jackson's writing, just like trying to solve a good old fashioned mystery. The twist definitely shocked me and it definitely got me, and I loved it. It was just a true mystery. Like I was on the edge of my seat, and I feel like I know it was good because I was genuinely scared reading it. Like I did not want to read that book in the nighttime. Like I was generally so creeped out by everything that was happening. I'm like, that's why I know this book is good. And the stuff that happens in this book is kind of insane. And I'm just like, oh my God, like I'm on the edge of my seat. Like what's going on? So that was definitely great. Like it was great to have that experience while reading it. Um, so that was the reappearance of Rachel Price. And then getting into my last four books of the year, I listened to Be Ready When the Luck Happens. This is Ina Garten's memoir. Honestly, I never really even heard of her before this book. I just heard other people talking about it and I was like, "Oh, like that sounds interesting." Like people were saying it was good. And I read some of the reviews and people were saying it's like, yeah, she's kind of out of touch. But yeah, something about me that I realized is just that I love a rich white lady who's kind of out of touch with the world, who's in her own world, her own bubble, just like, oh my God, I love life. I throw dinner parties and I go have famous friends. It's just for me, it's just so funny and entertaining. Like even like, and I'm not a person who really aligns with like this super rich high class like world, but I just find it so entertaining. Even like the Chiefs, like the president of the Chiefs wife, Tavia Hunter, like I follow her on Instagram. I feel like I have nothing in common with that lady, but I just find her like so interesting, just like being that rich and just like being a socialite and just like going to all these events. Like I just love it. But anyways, that's why I enjoyed Ina Garten's book. I completely like validate and completely understand all the criticisms that people have about her, but for me, I was just like, this is just like entertaining. And I kind of love how she kind of like so many people like you look at someone like Keith Lee who's like, I don't want any special treatment, like even if I have like someone famous with me, like everyone gets treated the same, like I don't care. And Ina Garten is like, no, if you're a celebrity, I'm gonna like make special treatment for you. Like even talking about guests on her cooking show, how she's like, no, I don't really take guests, blah blah blah. But then it was like Jennifer Garner, oh Jennifer Garner, that's Jennifer Garner, she can come on the show. And I'm like, I don't know, I just find that so funny. She's like, yeah, nepotism does work for me. I will bend the rule if you're famous. Like, I just find that so funny. I find her life just so interesting. I know she hasn't had an easy life. And honestly, I appreciated reading her book because I think, if anything, it kind of taught me to enjoy life more. It's like life is short, you know? I was reading that book just thinking, like, how did she get all the money to do all this house to buy these businesses and these houses? Was she really making that much money in Washington? Like, damn. But, I don't know. It was just in a way, like I know that she is a person who has a lot of privilege, so I think a lot of people look at her life and don't see it as super accessible. But at the same time, I think it was kind of inspiring to read, just like hearing, like, oh, okay, like this is just someone who's just living their best life to the fullest. That's something that I can do too. So I appreciated that. Okay, then I read The Teacher by Frida McFadden. I honestly loved this book. I thought it was so like entertaining. Truly, I kind of put off reading this book for a while because I kind of read the blurb about like how it's a teacher who's suspicious of like this student who may have had an affair with the teacher, and I was kind of like, okay, how is this like a mystery? Like I don't know, it felt kind of weird to me, but truly loved this book. Honestly, I feel like towards the end it was probably like a 3.75 ish for me, but the epilogue had my jaw literally on the floor. Like my jaw was on the floor with that epilogue, and I was like, okay, this is a 4.25. This book is really good, and I honestly think it's probably my favorite Frida McFadden book I've ever read. So I was a teacher. Then I read Definitely Better Now. 3.5 stars is what I gave it. It was just like a literary fiction book about this woman who is recovering from alcoholism, and she ends up having to throw her job's office holiday party, and there's like a romance in it as well. And truly, I mean, I thought this book was really entertaining. I mean, I wasn't like super connected at the end. I still thought it was good, but in a way, this book made me appreciate why I like literary fiction, because it's like it's just like a snapshot into like someone's life is what it feels like. And I have so much respect and appreciation for authors who do write literary fiction, because it's like, what do you mean you just came up with this idea to have a recovering alcoholic throw her office's Christmas party and like has a crush on her coworkers? Like, how do you even make a story about that? But it's definitely really, really cool. And I definitely enjoyed reading it. And then the last book I read of 2024, unfortunately, we had to end on a low note. I really was just looking for a quick book to read to end the year. Um, and I read The Perfect Marriage. I heard a lot of people talking about it. Unfortunately, it was 2 stars. I really did not enjoy the book at all. I hated the male main character, and um, I kind of had a suspicion. I didn't really guess the plot twist, but I had a suspicion that when the plot twist happened, it really wasn't all that surprising to me. And I just didn't like, I don't know, the story just felt, the way it was written just felt very elementary. Like the characters didn't really feel very fleshed out, and I felt like all the characters played into like this stereotype that there was almost no like effort in crafting a complicated, nuanced character. Everyone just fit their stereotypical box, which I didn't really like. And then again, I just felt like the writing just like wasn't great. It was just too I don't even really, it wasn't that long ago, and I just feel like I don't even really have a like great vivid memory of reading this book. It just didn't really stick out to me in my head. So that was A Perfect Marriage. So that was every single book that I read in 2024. I don't know, I've been talking for such a long time. I hope I hit all 80, but if anyone is watching this, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm so excited that this is the first video I'm ever posting. I'm so excited to kind of have this outlet where I can talk about books, which is something that I love so, so much, and hopefully have a community here that we can all talk about books and just support each other in our journeys in reading more. Um, but yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, everyone. Bye.